Hi everyone, I'm Sonia. This is Grizzly, and welcome to the So Grizz Quilting Studio. So I wanted to show you about a new block I'm working on, and it's just something I was playing around with, trying to make some kind of a log cabin block, but different. So I came up with, I suppose you can kind of call it half rectangle triangles. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I know I've seen these made, but I don't know if I've seen them in this context before. But anyway, I started playing around with them, and they kind of come together kind of fun. I like it. I like the effect it has. It has a bit of a spiral going on, but each one has turned out a little bit differently, depending on how you place the half rectangle triangles. And I just wanted to show you how I made it, because it is, I think, one of the quickest blocks I've ever made. They come together extremely quickly. So what I have here is basically a fat quarter of your material, your accent, and a fat quarter of the background. And my blocks come out to about 15 inches. This is another thing. I've been sewing it together extremely well, not precise. I've kind of been keeping a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but haven't been very strict with it. And it doesn't really matter, because at a certain point you just trim it all up by adding a little border, and it works out. So I do have you can cut these to any size you like. I've actually gone for a 2-inch center block. It's 2 inches, 2 inches, and then it's 2 by 4, 2 by 6, 2 by 8, 2 by 10, 12, 14, 16. The biggest one is 16. And if I remember that correctly, let me just double check that. I think that's what I did. No, 14. The biggest one is 14. I started then with a 16 strip, that's why. So to create the 2-inch block, I start with 3.5 inch squares, 1 square from the background, 1 square from the accent color. And it's the same idea for all the other blocks. So for example, your next block is the 4-inch by 2-inch. And then for that, let me just go to my little notes here. For that, you start with a 2 6-inch by 3.5. You make them, you sew them together, and then you trim to 2.5, 4.5. I'm going to show you how I do that, and I'm going to also stick up a little diagram that you can see the measurements I used. But you can actually, like I said, you can make it, I don't know, maybe you could make this into a 20-inch block, but you could probably also just make it a bunch smaller. So these come out at 2-inch wide, but I suppose you could have them at 1-inch wide even, or something like that. The cuts that I've made, making the half rectangle triangles, are random. So it's not, you don't have to match up any corners. You don't have to have precise cuts. That's what makes it so quick. So I'm going to show you. So the first strip that I'm going to cut, I have these lying on top of each other. So we have the background material and the accent material. And then first I want to just trim this up, so we're starting with the same edge. Oh, hang on a minute. My rotary cutter seemed to have disappeared. So I'm just going to trim up the edge, cut through both fabrics, and create an edge, a shared edge. All right. Now each strip you're going to cut, in my case, ending up with a 2-inch log cabin strips, you'll start with a 3.5 wide strip. So that's just the same for each piece you're going to cut. So we can start with that. Line up your 3.5 inch line along the edge, and then slide your ruler up. Often I pick it up and move it because I feel like when you slide it, it kind of scoots that material over and then it's not lying flat anymore. Okay, so for this first piece, because if you're using fat quarters, you're going to have about a good 18 inches there. So I've calculated which strips are handy to cut together. I'm going to trim this edge, so that's good place to start. And then we first want an 8-inch. Out of this one strip, I want an 8-inch and a 10-inch. So we got you got an 8-inch. Put that aside. And then you can use your mat ruler or your ruler to measure, and then that's just a little piece of scrap. Okay, I'm actually going to cut them all out for you, and then we're going to do the next step. So whatever your measurements are, like I said, to end up with 2 wide, I've started with 3.5 wide starter blocks. I want this to end up, so just after the first center square, my next strip is 4 because my center square is 2. So then you'll double that to 4. That means I'm starting with 6-inch long strips here. And then we're going to trim it down to 4.5 to work with. So if you're starting with a different center block, say you're starting with a 1.5, then this would be 3. What I want you to do is then just add 2 inches to it for your starter block. That will give you enough space to work with. And then for the width, I guess add 1.5 inch. So add 1.5 inch for your starter block to the width and 2 to your length. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to put it in a diagram. But it all kind of depends how wide and long you want your strips to end up, and that of course also depends on how big you want your final block, total block, to be. I mean, it'd be fun to try and make it really small as well, I guess. Okay, so I just trimmed that edge. This is 3.5 wide. The next 2 that will fit on here is a 12 and a 6. So we got a 12. Putting that aside, 12 and a 6. And then we got a little scrappy bit left over. Okay, and then one more at 3.5. Remember, we just start at 3.5. If you slide your ruler up like that, make sure that the material doesn't shift over. That you don't push it out of the way. Okay, just gonna trim this so we have a good starting edge to work with. The next ones are a 14. 14, so my ruler isn't quite long enough, so I'm going to actually count on the mat to make sure I have the right amount. Okay, so I need 14, so I'm going to go up to 17 here. Yep, got it. And then a 3.5, so that's just a little, that's for the center square. And then that's scrap. And then we need one more, which is going to be our 16-inch strip. And that's going to end up as the outermost strip in the log cabin, which we will cut down, trim down to 14.5 before attaching. Okay, so this one needs to be 16. Again, my ruler is not long enough, so I'm just going to line it up on my mat. Go to 16. See, this is really fast. If you have it all lined up like this, it's just, you know, and you have your measurements listed, so you know exactly like what to cut it at. It's going to go really, really quickly. So now I just pile them up in order, and let's just start with the smallest one. And what you're going to do is, let me just check that's on there. Yeah. What you're going to do is just cut these in half. Again, they are still on each other with both of their good sides pointing up. So the right side of the fabric is up. And now we're just going to randomly cut across. So you don't have to do like that exactly, or exactly like that, or at any angle you wish. Just cut across. And then I'll show you what we're going to do with the two halves, but I'm going to do it to all of them first and then set them aside. So what you have is, if you split them up and put this one here and put that one there, see? Then you got your half rectangle triangles, if that's the right word. When you go to attach these two pieces, you're just going to flip them right sides together and then make sure you have a little bit, so line up the edges and make sure you have a little bit sticking out on either side. And that will be your seam allowance. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't even have to be exactly like if you're sticking to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, that's great. You don't even have to be that exact at this point because we're going to trim the blocks. So let's just cut. I'm going to put that aside and take the next one. When you start putting your own pattern together, you can decide if you want to cut all of them the same way across, maybe all to the up to the left or up to the right, or maybe you want to alternate, or maybe you have like some pattern in mind that creates a certain effect. So you can look into that. You can also just not bother thinking about it and see what comes out when you just randomly cut. So see, so completely random cut. We'll put those aside and then we'll take them to the machine afterwards. So let me do from the other side. Again, random cut, not measuring anything. It's super fast. So we need another ruler for the next one because that's getting a little short. There you go. So you can cut them from corner to corner if you want, or you could do like that if you want. Totally fine. There are no rules here because just totally made it up anyway. Last one. There you go. So that's all you're going to need for your accent color. So the size of block that I've done works with a fat 1/4, and the only thing you're going to still need, so that's what you get left with on this size of the fat 1/4, and the little pieces that we cut off from the strips. You can still do that. That can go back in your scrap box. And then I still have this for the background, and I think this might not be just not enough for the borders, but we'll have a look. So you might need like a little bit more of than a fat 1/4 for the background. Okay, I'm going to take these. Let me show you one more time how I line them up, the two halves. And then I'm I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and then come back. But let me first show you how. So this is the rectangle that you split. You separate them like that. You take the top material off and you flip them around so that you have a pair like that. And then when you go to sew it together, remember to line the edges up, have it overhanging there. And then you're going to just stitch down this edge at a 1/4 inch distance from the edge with seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to go do that and then I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Chain pieced all these together. Chain piecing makes it a lot easier, especially when you're starting with points. I find it's great just to continue from the previous block. Goes a little faster. So now we have to iron these out, press them open. So I'm just gonna snip these apart and I'll show you how I do that. So with the sewing, I wasn't really paying much attention to getting the seam allowance exactly right. It's just not necessary because we're going to trim the block. So you'll see how that works. So this is quite a bit bigger than what we need. We're going to trim this one down to 2.5 square. So you have plenty of material to work with. If you find that you're cutting too much off, I think in the length you definitely need that length. Maybe in the width you find that you have too much to play with. You can always choose to do a smaller starter block instead of having 1.5 inch wider than the block you need. You could maybe just add 1 inch. But I like to be able to, when you have this, that you don't have to be too precise. You can actually position what you want to cut out exactly where you want to have it. So it's nice to have a bit of space to work with. Okay, I'm just gonna iron these all out and then I'm gonna show you how I trim them all down to size. All right, so we now have all our blocks ironed out. I've ironed them all towards the dark side so that it doesn't really matter. Again, you're not lining up any seams, but I decided to choose a side, stick with it, so they're all the same. Okay, then I'll show you how I trim it down. I've lined them all up. I've put them each corresponding size. I then flip it over, so you have, again, doesn't matter. It's just the way I found is nice to do, because now when I trim, I'm going to get a slightly different block, because if I lay the square that I'm going to trim out, if I lay it slightly to the left, then this one's going to get more of the color and that one's going to get more of the background. So it just gives a little bit of a variation. We do not have to line this up in the middle. It's completely not important for this block. So with a half square triangle, you would often then square it up by putting this on the diagonal of your ruler and then making sure that that would be in the center. It's completely irrelevant with these blocks. So we can just very easily trim these. My mat's bulging a bit because I was ironing here earlier, so a little bit warm. So let me show you. So this is the center block, which is going to be 2 by 2 once it's finished. So we want to trim it to 2.5, 2.5, and that's going to be true for whatever finished size you choose. Add on that half inch for your seam allowance. So 2.5 by 2.5, and then see, I can position it over here. I can put it right down here. I can put it in the middle. So whatever you want, and you have a good amount of fabric around to play with, so it makes it really quite easy. And although you are trimming a lot, the actual amount you're trimming off is not huge. So I don't think we need to worry about too much waste. Okay, so that's your cute little 2.5 inch center blocks. So they're going to become 2 inches after they're sewed into the quilt. The next one needs to be a 4-inch long, 2.5 wide, including the seam allowance. And we want it to end up as 4, so it's going to be 4.5 length now. So let's put I see the 2.5 line here and the 4.5 line here. And we're just going to make sure that it's all within the boundaries of what we have here. Ooh. So that it all fits within that piece of, within that block. So 2.5, line that up on the edge, 4.5, line that up here, 2.5, 4.5, hold it down, trim it off. The next one, again, 2.5 wide. Let's see that those are, make sure we don't have anything empty bits under there. 2.5 wide. This one needs to be 6.5 length. So make sure that that block underneath still has, that it's lying underneath there. Okay, 2.5, 6.5. Again, you can, like this one, put it kind of in the center and trim, or you can stick it all the way to one side so that you get a more off-centered block, which could also be quite effective. Completely up to you. So that's our 6. Okay, so the next piece is going to be finished at 8 inches by 2. So we're going to cut this now to 2.5, 8.5. Yeah, got that right. The piece under is a little shorter, so make sure that you don't go beyond that edge when this happens. And then we got 8.5, 2.5. Turn it around, line up that 2.5 right here, 8.5 at the bottom. As the blocks get bigger, I feel you get slightly less, especially in the length, you get less material that you have to trim off. This one is going to be 10 by 2, so we're going to cut it 10.5, 2.5. I'm just going to grab my other ruler. 10.5. Check the piece under. 10.5, 2.5. Oops, that was not very smart. Make sure you get through both layers. 10.5, 2.5. Okay, then 2 more. This one is 12.5, 2.5, because it's going to end up on 2 by 12. So remember to always add that 1/2 inch for your seam allowance. See, this one is actually quite tight on the length. So very little that you have to trim off. It's not a lot of waste doing this method. See, that was an exact fit at the top. Okay, one last one. What was that? That was 12.5. The last block is going to be 14 by 2, and actually we only need 1. So you could either trim it up or just put it to the side and put it in your scrap. This one is going to be, what did I just say? 14.5, 2.5. Now my ruler is not long enough, so I'm just going to line that up. Let me see. Go to 4 and an 18. Boy, I don't even know if this is long enough. I think I'm going to have to go all the way to the top. That is 12 and a half, and we wanted, okay, that's tight. So I'm just going to trim it on the sides to 2.5, and actually nothing off the length, because it's exactly 14 and a half, if not a little short, but it's going to be fine, because like I said, this is a really scrappy block, and when I sew the pieces together, it's you know, you end up trimming the block up and it all works out. Now we're gonna put do the layout. All right, so let's start in the beginning, in the middle. You're gonna have your center block. Get rid of that hair. Center block, and then the first block that goes around is the same size, but goes either side. You can go, I put it above and then add an angle. Then you grab your next one, and that will go to the side, which will attach those two together. So you always add the next block to where there is a seam. So you've just added that one. Now you're going to add the next one like that. And it's at this point you can decide how to lay your the diagonals. So you could do that, and then you could do that. Oh, that would work too. So you can flip them around a bit, and remember, once you've sewed it together, they're going to be the same size, because of course then the seam allowance is used up. So it's kind of like that. Now we want to go to this side. You need one size bigger. Again, have a think about how you want to lay it. Do you want to lay it like that or like that? And then we're basically going clockwise around, just like you would any other log cabin. And then the next size. And I'm not even thinking about the position too much, because I have found that when I just kind of randomly put them down, it creates quite a cool effect. All right, so now we have to go to the top. And then the next size down here. And then one more of those here. And then the very last strip to finish that off. Let me just check that. Oh, that actually came out really well on the camera. So yeah, at this point, if you see anything that you're like, that looks jarring, that doesn't seem imbalanced, you can change it. And if you're happy with it, you just take it to the sewing machine. What we're gonna do is this. You start in the middle. You're gonna attach this to this, flatten it out, attach this one to there, flatten that seam out, attach that one onto there, and then you're going to go around adding the blocks. You don't have to do any trimming because they should fit perfectly, but if there's a little bit sticking out, you can either snip that off with scissors, or just cover it up in your seam allowance. That's fine. And then eventually you will have this all attached, and then we're going to trim it up and put some borders on it. Let me show you a little bit how the strips come together. So I've already made a start here. This was the center block, and then we added that one, that one, that one, now that one. And then each time I push the seam towards the block that you just add, so away from the center block. Just flatten it out. There's no need to iron at this point. Now we're going to take the next block is there. So flip that on, right sides together. And I do so with the new block at the bottom, because at the top now I have all the seams and I want to make sure that they lay flat. A 1/4 inch seam allowance, but again, I'm not even being that precious about it, to be honest, because it doesn't have to all be exact, and that's what I'm really enjoying about this this block. So this is the block, this is the strip we just added. So I'm gonna fold the seam towards that new block, the outer block. So now we've just done that one. So now we have to go continue in clockwise, and it's gonna be this one. So just flip that on top, turn it around so you can see all the seams and make sure that they lay flat. And remember, we want them facing away from the center of the block. Okay, so that's the one we just added. Fold it out, flatten that seam, put it back in its the original layout so that you see where you need to go next. So this is the one we just did. We're going to grab the next one clockwise, flip it on, right sides together, turn it over so you can see all the seams. Make sure that the seams lay flat. Keep those edges lined up as best you can. It goes a little wonky. I'm not that bothered about it, to be honest. I found with all the blocks I've made so far, it kind of adds to the look that it's a little bit wonky. It doesn't have to be so perfect. All right, so that's how we started. We just did this one. So next one clockwise is over on this side. You can also see at this point, you know where to add next, because here there's one seam there, there's one seam there, but there are two on this side, and that's the side you want to cover, those two open seams. So flip that over, right side together. Line them up so you can see those seams. Make sure they lie flat. Yep, so just hold that down when you come over it. So that's the one you just did. So fold that out, flatten that seam. Just enough so you can sew on the next piece. So that's the original layout. You can see one open seam, two open seams. So that's the next one we're gonna do up here. Flip it over, right sides together. So I'm going to take this over to my ironing board, lay that all flat, and then we're going to have a look at the borders. Okay, so we put all the strips together and I ironed it. I have all the seams facing out away from the center of the block, so they're all facing outwards and it's lying pretty flat. I've cut some border strips. So I have them at 1 3/4 inch. Just so that, I mean, it's completely your own choice. If you want a border, you can have a 1 inch border or a 5 inch border. It doesn't really matter. You can also do it, leave them like this. So this is how it came out. So you can leave the block like this, or I'm giving it a border because I like to have that clean edge to work with when you then start attaching it to other blocks. Don't know yet what I'm going to do with all these blocks, but that's the next step. Not a problem. Okay, so I have a couple strips here, like I said, 1 inch 3/4. That means that I then have a 1.5 inch after sewing it on, 1.5 inch that I can then use to trim to make sure it's the same as all the other blocks. I'm just going to sew it, sew one to one side like this, trim it off. Then I'm going to sew this strip to that side and then trim that off. And then I'm going to have these come down these sides on this, and then to block it all in. All right, so I have added all the borders. So now it has nice clean edges that we can work with. And we're going to trim it down to 16 inches. Sorry, yeah, 16. And I don't have a ruler that big, so I'm going to do it on my mat. What I'm going to do is line the center of the block up on one of the lines of my mats, and then I'm going to count 8 inches to either side, because you want that to stay in the middle, and then you want to take the same amount off each side. So I'm going to count 8 inches out on this side and trim a little off, and then 8 inches out on this side. And I'm using my mat, the lines on my mat, to do that. If you have a really big ruler, you can do it with the ruler. So now I'm going to rotate this. Again, line the center up with a line on your mat, and then measure out 8 inches on both sides. I just want to get that better in the middle. Yeah. Okay, so then counting out, is that straight? Let me just check that straight. So then trim at that side, trim on this side, and then all our blocks are the same size. So I've made a few, and they're all the same size, and now I need to decide what to do with them. So I probably make a few more. Like you saw, it's so fast and it's so easy, and the layout can be, you can copy the layout exactly for each one so they're identical. Fine. You can do them randomly and just get a different effect. The effect is going to be the same, so you know, no matter what the layout is. And then we're just going to add them. I'm just going to at some point put them all together and see what that comes out with, and I'll be sure to let you guys know. So that I'll be showing you, and I also think that I will be showing you a different pattern I've been working on. The pattern is a free pattern you can download from the site. I've called it my Mountain Valley block. It is a star block, and it uses a section here that it's kind of like a flying geese with like the head of the geese in there or something, the goose. I don't know, but it's really not a block I'd seen before, and I came across it on one of Donna Jordan's videos, which are all amazing, by the way. And she seemed to be quite surprised with this block as well. I'm going to put a link when I put this one up, and I think I've linked to it as well on the free pattern download. I linked to her to her video, because then you can see what pattern she was making. But it's a great block, and I did adapt it a bit from how she made it, or how the pattern told her to make it, just to have a little bit less waste. I love it. I love how these came together, and this is definitely more precision work than the blocks we just worked on. Whereas with this one, I didn't care. Seam allowance, direction, none of that matters. This one obviously is much more precision work. These are all not identical blocks. They're 2 blocks in the quilt. And the only variation really is the center hourglass. So the hourglass has 2 darks here, or a dark and a medium, and here there's a medium and a light. So they will alternate in the quilt and just come together like that. I don't think I'm going to add any sashing. I didn't in the pattern, so it's just going to be very simple, put it together, but it creates a wonderful secondary, sorry, it needs to be like that, secondary pattern with the 4 patches, which I really love. And the mountain blocks coming together here as well creates a really fun little effect. So look out for that, because I'll be showing you how to put each section of the block together, especially this one, which I'd never seen before. So you might be interested in seeing that. All right, so thanks very much. Thank you for watching. And if you liked the video, please subscribe. And you can also find us on Instagram at SoGrizQuilting. Grizz, say goodbye. Stop looking away from camera. He's a little camera shy, I think. All right, bye-bye. See you next time.